and welcome to this webinar, The Steps of Crisis Recovery, the Experience in Switzerland and China. This is a joint event organized by the Swiss-Mexican Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Swiss Business Hub Mexico, and Switzerland Global Enterprise. So with countries like China and Switzerland starting to ease their emergency lockdown, the goal of this webinar is to present how Swiss companies, both in Switzerland and China, are operating in this crisis recovery environment. Now, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Rubén Araiza, the director of the Swiss Business Hub in Mexico.
Thank you, Christian, for the introduction, and good morning and good afternoon and good night, depending on where you are located. It's a pleasure to have all of you on board. I see so many names I know, and the attendance is quite high, so I'm pretty happy. I do hope that you can enjoy this webinar that we have organized in collaboration with the Swiss Chamber and Switzerland Global Enterprise. Just for those that don't know what the Swiss Business Hub is doing, we are part of the Swiss Embassy, and we're also part of the Swiss Confederation, and we help small and medium-sized companies in Switzerland and Liechtenstein to expand their activities and enter into the Mexican market. We have an experienced team of experts, which is ready to support all types of sectors, acting as a first local contact for Swiss companies. We promote Switzerland as an ideal place to do business and investment for Mexican companies seeking growth in Switzerland and of course also in Europe. Just in a nutshell, our services are mergers and acquisitions, foreign direct investment, market evaluation, product analysis, search for distributors, B2B and B2C sales pipeline development, individual consulting, site location evaluation, fund funding missions for Swiss companies and others. So we're here to help you, to let you know that you have a counterpart that can support you if you want to develop the Mexican market. Thank you. You can continue with the next slide, Christian.
Thank you, Ruben. So before introducing our speakers, I will very briefly in one slide talk about the coronavirus situation in Mexico. We are currently in phase 3 with, until yesterday, more than 35,000 confirmed cases according to the government and about 3,500 deaths. And the area with the most cases is Mexico City. Regarding the economic impact, we have social distancing measures until till the beginning of June. And the president announced yesterday that he will have another meeting to announce the crisis recovery strategy and the opening of establishments. So according to many business associations, economic measures have been lacking from the federal government, but state governments have taken a very active role in health, sanitary, and also economic measures. And finally, the private sector gathered in the Coordinating Business Council, which is the Consejo Coordinador Empresarial, to launch this national agreement for economic recovery. So we will keep you informed about that. And it will be very good now that we are starting to talk in Mexico about going back to well, I wouldn't say normal, but to the new normal. To have this, so we're honored to have these two speakers today with us, Mr. Peter Bachmann and Mr. René Naf. So Peter Bachmann is the executive director of the Swiss-Chinese Chamber of Commerce based in Shanghai. So I will give the floor to you, Peter, and later introduce Mr. René Naf.
Right. Okay. So 2 parts. One is maybe the introduction to our chamber very briefly. It's of course very similar to what you do in Mexico. You see, this is our board. We have several board members, probably similar to what you have in Mexico. We have representatives from small SMEs, small middle-sized companies. We have representatives of multinational companies. We have representatives from Swissnex, and also the Consul General is part of it. Okay, next one, please. Briefly, what we do, we have offices in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Chengdu. This means we are present more or less in every part of the large country in China. We work very closely with SwissCham Hong Kong, with other chambers in Switzerland, but also with the consulate and the embassy, and with Swiss Business Hub as well, which is quite present in China as well as in Mexico. Next one, please. We represent around 600 members. Most of them are in Shanghai, while the headquarters is in Beijing, but Shanghai, as you can see, has the most members. Most of the business is in Shanghai. Some in Guangzhou and Hong Kong still represents quite a lot of companies. Next one, please. In terms of breakdown, briefly, mostly machinery, equipment, and we have consulting, legal, and audit companies, also quite a lot. But most of the companies, as you can see, are in manufacturing, machinery, equipment, position, and so on. Might be similar to what you have in Mexico. Next one, please. Services, we organize around 70 events per year in Shanghai. We talk about compliance, labor law, IP, taxes, so we offer quite diverse events. We also have committees, legal, HR, finance, tax, hospitality. What we also do quite a lot, not now, but until last year, we did quite a lot of company visits. So we go to companies close to Shanghai, like Geberit, Schindler, ABB, and so on. And then these companies tell us a little bit how, what they do in the Chinese market and their plans for the future. We also have official visits with the ambassador and with the embassy. Yes, next slide, please. Now we come to the impact of the coronavirus. I thought if I show you this, then it might be good, because we just recently did a survey with our members, and maybe the results of this survey might be of interest to you. This slide here shows you actually the difference. On the very left, you see the picture, that's a normal picture, that shows you the pollution levels. So on the top, you see the red parts, that's Beijing. And then to the right of Wuhan, you see Shanghai, it's also quite red. And below is Hong Kong. And then on the right picture, you see that's China when there is the coronavirus. So basically when people don't work, when factories don't produce anything. So you see the pollution quality, or actually the pollution is much lower, of course. And as you can see, it has a huge impact on people living in the north of the country. Hundreds of millions of people are impacted on a daily level, basically on this pollution. So this is one of the big advantages that we currently have. Yes, these are the cases we have in China as of I think last week. We had around 82,000 cases and over 4,600 people died because of the coronavirus. It's around 5%, yeah, a little bit around 5%. Now to this survey. It's very recent. It has been done in April, and we got 120 companies that have participated from different sectors. You can see we have industrial goods manufacturing mostly, consulting, consumer goods, healthcare, and watches. So it's very broad. So we think it's quite a useful survey and the results. As you also can see, company size, 58% are SMEs with less than 100 employees. So that means we have the very small companies that participated in our survey. And then we have also, of course, bigger companies. But that's for us quite important that we also hear the small companies and not only the big ones. Now on this slide, you see the ongoing challenges. We asked what are the biggest challenges you currently have, and you see in red color, the biggest challenges are by far reduced demand, reduced revenue, reduced profits, but also at the lower end, you see travel restrictions. In China, it's very difficult to travel still as of today, from one city to another, or from one province to another. And also, of course, it's difficult to travel to the country. So for now, no foreign person is allowed to travel to China. Chinese people can, but not foreign people. So this has a huge impact on businesses that need specialists, that need their foreign employees and managers coming back to the country, but they can't. So you see, these are quite very strong challenges that companies still face today. Next slide, please. On this slide, we asked which challenges have you been able to solve? And then in green color, you see quite a lot of companies have been able to solve staff shortages at the very top, general HR issues. This means related to Chinese employees, basically. So 35% say, yes, we have solved these problems. Local supply chain disruptions, almost 30% say they are solved. And then on the very lower part, you see lack of protective equipment. I'm not sure how the situation is in Mexico, but in China, the lack of protective equipment was a huge issue, basically in February, end of January, when the government allowed the people to know about the coronavirus. And at that time, masks were not available for people, for example. However, right now, that's not an issue anymore. In red color, you see what hasn't been solved, basically. So similar of what the slide we have seen before. Next slide, please. Now this slide asked, when do you expect your company's business operations to return to normal? When do you think we can have our company up running like it was last year? And most of the companies are very optimistic in the sense majority thinks, yes, by the middle of the year, we should be back up running normally. In green color, you see April, May, and June. However, you also see then about 10% think, well, it takes until 2021, until next year to get back to normal. So it's a mixed picture. And some 22% think it's too early to say. Next slide, please. In terms of investments, some companies believe the coronavirus will impact their investments quite strongly by over 40%, think almost 10%, between 20 and 40% in decreased investments. 20% of companies believe that will be the case, and so on. But at the same time, you see on the top, same as planned. So about 22% of the companies believe the coronavirus has no impact on investments planned in the China market. This is also a very strong sign, basically. Next slide, please. So in summary, we can say the biggest challenges, and still we cannot overestimate these challenges. I mean, travel restrictions, it's inside the country is huge. Sometimes people leave a city, but then they're not allowed to come back. So you have to imagine this can be a real nightmare for companies and for people, for families and for business, and still a huge issue. Solve challenges, that's the very good thing. So companies, the government were able to solve challenges that really made life difficult. Lack of protective equipment, so people feel safe, companies feel safe. Staff shortages for Chinese employees if they're in China. Revenues, are challenges, and many companies believe they will lose quite a big part this year compared to what they had in budget. Business operations, 52% expect regular operations latest by June. And we also had a slide about supply chains. And this is quite interesting because 23% consider additional supply chains outside of China. So that means they want to limit or lower their dependence on the Chinese market. This could be interesting for other Asian countries. This could be interesting for countries in Europe or even for Mexico, because many companies today, they depend too much on China. And they saw in the last couple of weeks and months that this could be a risk. And the very last point are the planned investments. The positive thing is 22% don't expect a change for this year. Okay, next slide, please. So now we come to the development. What did actually happen afterwards, after the coronavirus broke out, and what did the government do to help? I guess in Mexico, the government is supporting the companies as well, is supporting businesses, and probably around the world, there are very similar measures taken, for example, tax and fee cuts. But you see in China, because of the huge market, they cut taxes and fees worth over $105 billion US. $105 billion US just in first quarter. So that's huge. Tax revenue in the first quarter was 492 billion, but down 16% compared to last year. So you see these are incredible big amounts. And some, yeah. Company relief measures. What has the government done to help companies? Even for SwissCham, for our employees, we have full-time staff in our office, Chinese staff. We have lower social insurance fees. So that means the government will pay a part of it. So that lowers our costs for our employees, as well as for the Swiss Chamber. And the rent subsidies. So if, let's say, our company would be renting an office in a building that belongs to the government, then we could expect a rent subsidy, or maybe 1 or 2 months rent-free. Okay, and below we have the remaining challenges. Especially, I would not neglect the supply chains because of the vast country and the difficulty in importing to China right now. Supply chains are a big headache, while the other points we have basically mentioned already. But the last point, rising costs of production and logistics, is certainly something that needs to be considered for many companies, whether they are big or small, because China gets more and more expensive. Some of the salaries that are paid today in Shanghai are higher than in Eastern Europe or in Central Europe. So that, and sometimes even in Germany or France. So that means China doesn't have to be cheap. In many cases, it's not cheap anymore to produce. And so this could be opportunities for other countries. Next slide, please. Here is a snapshot of, I wanted to show you the fast recovery of the China economy in the second quarter. However, as you can see, it seems not very likely according to this graph. You see the PMI manufacturing, new exports and non-manufacturing PMI. They have recovered, but then you see there is a dip or a stabilization. So it might not be a V recovery as many companies and governments hope for the Chinese economy. It might be a little bit more challenging. And at the same time, as you might know, the figures that the government is publishing cannot be really verified. So we have just to take them as on face value and believe what they tell us. We all hope for a V recovery, but it doesn't have to be one in the second quarter. Next slide. I think that should be it. Yes. I would recommend 2 books. One is written by Michael Pillsbury, the one on the right. You probably can buy that as well in Mexico, and it's quite a lot in the news. And the left one is a little bit dated already, both of them actually. If you want to know a little bit more about the Chinese economy and how China is in China's strategy, basically, then I would recommend those two books to you. Yes, thank you. I think that's it from my part.
Thank you, Peter, very much. I think many countries look to China to see what is happening in the manufacturing sector, but also in the services sector, and how the recovery is going.